Hello, everybody. Welcome back. First, let me begin with an apology because this is getting to you a little bit later in the week than I would have wanted it to start with. Partially, well, almost all, because the other classes I teach this semester, speech classes, they are all submitting their first speeches this week, so that's like 60 plus speeches I have to listen to and grade, and I'll be honest with you, it's kind of taking its toll on me right now. I'm not totally brain dead, but I'm not that far off either. Anyway, yeah, I had to kind of prioritize that because there are 4 of those classes, and one of you, though, don't tell them, you're always first in my heart. But yeah, I had to set them forward for a sec. So we're going to pick up where we left off, much to your chagrin, I am sure, with talking about Shakespeare. Last week we talked about his bio, his life story, his marriage, his kids, what his career, the trajectory of his career, what the world that he was living in was kind of like, so that you get some sense of the guy, right? That it's a guy writing these plays. And like I said, I think part of the problem, part of the stumbling blocks for people is that they lose sight of the fact that he's a guy, right? He becomes this cold marble bust that doesn't seem human. And in an English class, which is where you study Shakespeare, every word is perfect and everything is golden and everything has meaning, and oh my god. And Shakespeare was a working theater artist, right? He did what he did to make money, and he is, as far as I know, the only playwright who got filthy stinking rich by just being a playwright. Part of the reason why is because he got paid 3 times over every time his group did one of his plays, and by a certain point they were doing nothing but his plays. I talked about that last week. Anyway, so yeah, I went through all that just to sort of remind you that there is a human being behind all of this, right? And to give you some sense of the world that he lived in. This week, we are going to talk about the reason why he is worth talking about in the first place, which is we're going to look at the collected works of William Shakespeare, but mostly the plays, though, because the sonnets don't really do anything for me. Yeah. And let me be clear right off the bat. You don't have to memorize a lot of play titles. You don't have to know the plots of a lot of plays. I'm going to walk you through each of the different types of plays that Shakespeare wrote, right? And give you some sense of, all right, if you're watching this kind of play by Shakespeare, what are the usual characteristics of it? How would you recognize it? If you saw it, how would you pick it out of a lineup of choices? Should you need to, right? What things make this a comedy or a history or a romance or tragedy, right? So that you just have a working understanding of the broad universe of plays that he is working in. Because, yeah, I mean, most of you in the discussion board said that you had read Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, there's a couple of Macbeths, 1 or 2 Julius Caesars in there. And those plays, you may not, I love them all, but love them though I do, those are like 3 or 4 plays out of, at least 39 that he wrote. So, yeah, he wrote a huge volume of work. He's a prodigious playwright, writing a lot of material. So, yeah, I think it is important to understand the kind of plays that he wrote and his style of writing and, what those plays were like, get a sense of them. I'm going to point out, the important ones, run you through, say, an example of this type of play. But that said, like I promised last week, you do not have to watch any Shakespeare, you don't have to read any, you just have to listen to me talk about it a bit. There will be 4 plays that I want you to know at least enough about the plot to tell them apart from one another, but I will make those crystal clear to you which ones those are. Yeah. Okay, so when I say the complete works of William Shakespeare, let me remind you what I mean by that. That would be 39 completed stage plays, asterisks, depends on which scholars you believe, at least 39. There might be 1 or 2 more extra that he maybe wrote or maybe wrote parts of that some people will consider him to have written, but there's at least 39, right? 39 completed stage plays, 154 sonnets, which sonnets are 14-line poems that use a certain rhyme and rhythm scheme. that were popular back in that point. Shakespeare had 154 of them. He published the collected volume of 154 sonnets as a book during his lifetime. He didn't publish his own plays, but he did publish the sonnets. Again, they're not really my thing. Two long narrative poems, Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece, which are legitimately, oh my god, so terrible. They are excellent at curing your insomnia. I have read them. I know I have. Like, I usually start and then everything's going fine, but usually by the bottom of like the first page, I wake up, jerk awake, and there's drool all over me because, yeah, they suck. Oh my god, they suck. They're written early in his career, so that is why they suck, but yes, they suck. So those things, that's what the works of Shakespeare mean. 39 completed stage plays, 154 sonnets, these two long narrative poems, which, you know, I'm going to make fun of, but not really talk about. All right, so, yeah, the plays are what we're talking about, right? It's a theater class. The influence that the plays have is big and long, and like I said, that's what our focus is going to be over this week. But, let me be honest with you. There is such a thing as knowing too damn much about something, and Shakespeare, I know too damn much about it. So, I can't help myself. You want to follow along with the slides with these lectures this week because I'm going to be making reference to them a lot. Picking up, if you're with me on slide 4, damn it, here's a little bit about the sonnets. Because, while, you know, they're not my thing, they do contain some interesting stuff. So, here's the basics of what you need to know about it as far as I'm concerned. They were originally published in 1609. The 154 sonnets can either be said to be telling a complete story, like you read all 154 poems and yeah, there's a storyline through the poems, or perhaps Shakespeare is writing about stuff that's going on in his life through those poems, right? It tells a story one way or the other, whether it is a fictional story or it is based on stuff that was going on with his life. One way or the other, whether it's fictional or not, certainly there are characters present in the 154 sonnets, 3 of them specifically. So each of the sonnets is addressed to one of these characters, right? The 3 characters are the fair youth, the rival poet, and the dark lady. If they're not just characters, if they're not fictional characters, if they are correlated to somebody in Shakespeare's life that he knew, that he was involved with at the time, that he dealt with, then yeah, it is worth talking about the sonnets a little bit because who those 3 characters might have been and how they related to him, yeah, I think that's pretty fun. All right, so because Shakespeare scholars get bored, people have spent the last 400 years trying to figure out exactly who the hell he might have been talking about in the sonnets, if they are real people that he's writing about. And while I can't give you definitive answers, I certainly can give you best guess, right? One of them I can give you a definitive answer. The fair youth, that's the first character, quite possibly, almost definitely, refers to Shakespeare's patron, the 3rd Earl of Southampton. Here's how art worked in the Renaissance. You're poor, you want to make art, you glom on to some rich person and say, hey, if you pay my bills, I will create this work of art and dedicate it to your honor. So yeah, Shakespeare as a struggling young poet, playwright, would almost certainly need a patron. His was the 3rd Earl of Southampton. Certainly, we definitively know that the 2 long narrative poems that I just made fun of, Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece, they are directly dedicated to the 3rd Earl of Southampton. If you're following along the slides, this will be useful because I want you to see him. Pick it up on slide 7. That guy right there, Henry Wriothesley. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. I mean, look at it. Good God. Anyway, Henry there, he and his cross-eyed cat, that is the fair youth. So any poem that is dedicated to the fair youth, Shakespeare's basically writing to this guy right here. Okay? That's the first one. More interestingly, the second character, the rival poet, is usually thought to maybe be an amalgam of several poets and playwrights that he might have known, that he worked with in the day. But most people have suggested, and I certainly believe, that more than all the rest, Shakespeare is almost certainly referring to a specific playwright, poet, who also happened to be an assassin spy for the Queen Elizabeth, named Christopher Marlowe. All right, Christopher Marlowe is fascinating. He is the one who invents blank verse, so if you don't like the way they talk in Shakespeare, blame him, because Marlowe came up with this whole verse form. Marlowe was the most popular playwright in England in his time, in the 1580s, the early 1580s, up through the 1590s. Christopher Marlowe is the be-all, end-all. Nobody's heard of Shakespeare, certainly not at the beginning of his career, because Shakespeare's plays suck at the beginning of his career. And yeah, there's some overlap between Marlowe and Shakespeare. Christopher Marlowe is kind of awesome, right? I say assassin spy. He certainly was a spy for Queen Elizabeth. He probably had killed some people for her too. Yeah. If you are looking at the slides, look at slide 9. That image is Marlowe. I mean, that's an anonymous painting that people are like, we don't exactly. Yeah, it's Christopher Marlowe. That's Christopher Marlowe right there. Okay, this guy, in addition to being an assassin spy and poet playwright, and the most popular poet playwright of the day, Christopher Marlowe was an avowed atheist, right? At a time when being the wrong type of Christian could get you burned at the stake for being a heretic, Marlowe was an atheist, right? And he was not subtle about this. I mean, he couldn't publicly proclaim it, but he did write a pamphlet encouraging people to adopt atheism and how religion was stupid and all this kind of stuff. And while he didn't sign his name on it, he left enough clues in the text that if you had half a brain, you could figure out who wrote it, right? Which got him into trouble. So while he did some work for Queen Elizabeth as an assassin spy, he almost certainly would have been executed by Queen Elizabeth if she had gotten the chance once this whole anti-religion pamphlet thing came out. But Queen Elizabeth got beaten to the punch for killing Marlowe because Marlowe went drinking one night, the way you do, and he got into heated discussion about the man he was drinking with about who should pay the bar tab that night. Marlowe said, "You should pay the bar tab." The guy said, "No, I'm not." Marlowe said, "Oh, you're paying the bar tab." And then the other guy responded by pulling out a knife, and then he stabbed Marlowe in the eye and killed him over the bar tab. So yeah, went out drinking on his feet, I guess. Anyway, he would have been arrested basically days after that had he not died that night, but he died that night. So yeah, any poem that is dedicated, any sonnet that is meant for the rival poet is dedicated to Christopher Marlowe. He's writing about Marlowe in that. Okay, and Marlowe's death, by the way. Marlowe dies. He's the most popular poet playwright in London. He dies, and suddenly that leaves a gap. And our man Shakespeare is rising to prominence in this moment and drives through that gap and then becomes the most popular playwright in London at the time and ever because Marlowe died. We have some of Marlowe's works. Some of them survive. They are ridiculous. They're good. They're not Shakespeare good. They are super violent and they are super bloody and kind of two-dimensional in their characters. There is a play called The Jew of Malta in which the main character Barabbas poisons an entire monastery full of nuns and then cackles while they foam green at the mouth and then go right. Yeah, he laughs like a James Bond villain. Anyway, years and years ago, I was in a Marlowe play called The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus, about a guy who sells his soul to the devil for more knowledge and then gets ripped apart at the end by demons when he tries to renege on the bargain. Yeah, so Marlowe's plays, had he lived longer, maybe he would have attained closer to kind of the greatness that we associate with Shakespeare. Certainly he influenced Shakespeare, but yeah, because he died fairly young, he never had the chance to grow beyond his two-dimensional, though admittedly fun, super violent plays. So he's the second character, the rival poet. And then, number 3, the interesting one, the Dark Lady. So, the Dark Lady of the Sonnets is so named because she is specifically referred to as having black, wiry hair, black eyes, and a, quote, dun complexion, which means dark, right? All of the sonnets, which are dedicated to the Dark Lady, are much more bawdy and overtly sexual in nature. There's no like frou-frou romance poetry, roses are red, I love you so much kind of. No, it is all about, turn on the lights, turn on Marvin Gaye and get down tonight. That is what the poems to the Dark Lady are about. They're much more sexual in nature and obvious. And, lots and lots and lots of attempts have been made by people to find a real person that Shakespeare could have been writing to or referring to when he was writing to the Dark Lady. Truthfully, nobody has any clue who it really was. There are some people who suggested that the Dark Lady should be taken literally, that there were at least 2 African women who were living in London at the time who would have been in the area that Shakespeare would have been living in, near the theater district. So possibly, like, he means it literally, Dark Lady, one of these 2 African women. It could refer to a noble woman who's who he's having an affair with, who's already married. He was already married too, so yeah. Some people have even gone all the way up to the level of ridiculous and suggested that it's Queen Elizabeth. It's not. That's stupid. But, yeah, nobody has any idea who it is. We don't know who the Dark Lady sonnets are written to. We can definitively say it was written, certainly not written to one person, which was Shakespeare's wife. Certainly he was not writing to his wife when he's writing these. But, yeah, nobody has any idea who it really is. So the sonnets to the Dark Lady are the most interesting. I am not a sonnet fan. Like, I have an English degree for my bachelor's, and, some English scholars spend their whole careers just reading the sonnets and analyzing them, and oh my god, I'd rather you run over me with a truck. Love the plays, not so big on the sonnets. That said, I feel like it is important to give you a taste of them. I will walk you through the most famous sonnet of the bunch, which is Sonnet 18. If you're following along, forgive my cough. If you're following along, it's slide 12. Now, one of the things that came up on the discussion board repeatedly was the language barrier, right? They talk funny. They're speaking in poetry. That's hard to understand. I promise you, the more you hear it and the more you get used to it, it becomes kind of second nature. But I'll translate for you. Right? I'm going to walk you through this sonnet. And when I'm done with it, I'm going to blow your freaking minds over it. Sonnet 18 is one of the most famous romance poems in all of the English language. So, if you want to get on your significant other's good side, bust this out at them. Alright, so I will translate as we go. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare you to a summer's day, person I'm talking to? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. You are prettier and nicer than a day in summer. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometimes, sometimes it's not so pleasant outside in May, and sometimes it's, one way or the other. However beautiful summer is in this moment, it's all going to be over soon, because summer always seems to go faster, right? Second stanza. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. Sometimes you go out in the summer, it's too damn hot outside. And often is his gold complexion dimmed, or you go outside and the sun is behind clouds, it's cloudy and unpleasant, and every fair from fair sometime declines. Everything that is beautiful will not be eventually, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. The way the world is, we get older, we die, that which is beautiful now will not be eventually. Third stanza. But thy eternal summer, person I'm talking to, shall not fade, nor shall you lose possession of that fair thou owest. You'll always be pretty. Always. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. The longer this poem goes on, death will never claim you. You will always be as beautiful in this moment that I'm writing this forever. Death can't brag that they've got you. No. Because, last 2 lines, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this poem, and this poem gives life to thee. So yeah, should I compare you to a summer's day? You're way better than a day in summer. And I'm saying all this because to tell you that you are amazing and beautiful, and you always will be, because this poem exists, which means that every time people read it and think of you. They will think of how beautiful you are in this moment right now. I've made you beautiful forever. I mean, yeah, it's not a bad thing to throw out at your significant other to tell them how beautiful and awesome they are. Let me blow your mind for a sec, though. If you have the text of the poem up in front of you, glance at it for a second and let me ask you this question. Is this sonnet overtly bawdy or sexual in nature, the imagery? The answer is no. No, it's not, right? It's not a trick question, right? It's not like a Virginia O'Keeffe painting where the flowers are vaginas. No, it's not bawdy or overtly sexual in nature, which means that this poem is not dedicated to the Dark Lady. This poem, in fact, is dedicated to that first guy, the fair youth, he and his cross-eyed cat. So yeah, the greatest romantic poem, one of, in the English language, was totally written to a dude. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, huh? Now, I say that. I'm not saying that Shakespeare was gay, right? But then again, I'm not saying it either, because who knows? It was a long time ago, and it was a private relationship. I will say that back then, male affection was a little bit different than it is these days. They were much more comfortable with males showing physical affection towards each other. They would, hug each other more. They would be physically closer. Sometimes they would hold hands, and that was not a big thing or deal to them at all. They were totally comfortable with that. And plus, if you look at the text of the poem, right, there's nothing in it that is overtly romantic in nature, right? It is one of the most famous romance poems in the English language because we all read a romantic relationship in it when we read the poem. But it didn't have to be. I mean, what it's saying is, you're beautiful and awesome, and you always will be. So, yeah, Shakespeare could be saying this to this guy that he has no sexual relationship with whatsoever. Could be just about how awesome the guy is. But then again, as I said, I'm not saying that Shakespeare was gay either, because, I've been in theater long enough. Bisexuality is fairly common, and, if you're uncomfortable with that, then, oh dear, wait until we get to musical theater. Yeah. One way or the other, I will say that in the comedy plays, you got to watch out for a character named Antonio. Anytime Antonio shows up in a comedy play, there's something funny going on. Usually Antonio is a secondary character who is a guy who has a best friend, and he's all about his best guy friend. Anything for you, bro. Anything for you. I'll risk my life. I will get tortured. I will do whatever I can to make sure that you aren't hurt and that you get everything you want because I'm just so into you, my best guy friend. Yeah, there's something funny going on with Antonios in comedy plays. So, yeah, maybe Shakespeare was gay, maybe he wasn't. Certainly he didn't have much affection for his wife one way or the other. So, you can read the 50 Shades of Grey between the lines if you want. Anyway, those are the sonnets. And I think they're fun because of the tea that I just got to spill on that poem, that it was written to a dude. Maybe don't, tell your significant other that unless, they like that. So yeah, moving on, let's talk about the plays. So yes, the plays for real from now on. Okay, for most of theater history, most of Shakespeare's history in theater, 400 years, the type of plays he wrote were broken up into three genres, three categories, right? Comedies, histories, and tragedies. But about 150 years ago, some really snobbish, know-it-all, elitist people broke the comedies up and added a fourth category, took some of the comedies and put them into this fourth category. Now, I am nothing if not a cultural, elitist, snobbish person, so yeah, there are four categories of Shakespeare plays, right? Comedies, histories, tragedies, and romances. Again, I'm going to walk you through each of these types so that you can understand what that kind of play is and would be if somebody plopped you down in the middle of a theater and you were watching a scene, having no idea what the play was, be able to recognize it as one of those types of plays. And I'll give you an example play, the basics of one, so you get the idea of how that kind of play works. As far as dating these plays go, I mean specific dating of when the plays were written or performed. For some of them, it's very easy. Some of them, we have a direct date where it's written out when it was first performed. For others, it's pretty tricky. The timeline changes depending on what scholarship is most popular at the moment. In other words, people have to do a lot of guesswork because, because a lot of people didn't read back then. A lot of written records aren't necessarily saved or preserved, especially play scripts. So play performances, play bills. Those weren't kept. So, except for rare cases, we have no idea. Generally speaking, there are a couple of plays we directly know because there is a written, recorded announcement, or somebody wrote a review of the play that they saw the night before, and it's a journal and it's dated. For some of them, you have to make an educated guess. Like there is a play where Shakespeare, one of the characters talks about a comet going overhead the year before, and people are like, well, Halley's Comet would have been visible the year before, and so maybe it's this year because Halley's Comet would have gone over England. Yeah, like that kind of guesswork. For some, there's a comedy called Twelfth Night, or What You Will. Twelfth Night is referring to the 12 Days of Christmas, and we know it was written in honor of a wedding ceremony as a wedding present. So, and performed at the wedding, and it's about love. So, educated guesswork for some. I mean, in general, the language kind of clues things in. I mean, and it's oversimplified, of course, but if the play sucks and the language is really not so good and hard to read and hard to follow, and the writing is bad, then it's written early in his career because he sucked at first. He got better, and so the better the writing is in the play, usually that means that people will try to date it later on, or if the style of it is similar to other plays written of a time that we know, but I don't know, who knows. Anyway, some came earlier than others. By the end of his career, he wasn't writing many comedy plays. We'll talk about why when we get there later on. But so I'm going to walk you through each category and break it down for you, give you an example, and then move along. So 4 to look forward to. Oh, it is worth noting. Next week, we will have the first exam for the class. I figure, hey, we've been in class for a few weeks. Why not, give a test to prove that you've been in class for a couple weeks? Basically, I put a study guide up on Blackboard already. The test will cover everything I have lectured on in videos and PowerPoints from, the first lecture, the intro stuff, to Greek theater, through plays, playwriting, types of plays, through the Shakespeare stuff. And when this week of lectures is over, when I finish the Shakespeare stuff, that'll be everything that's on the test. The test is probably going to be it will be multiple choice. I'm not sure how many yet, but it will be multiple choice, and that will be happening next week. I will go over the answers to the study guide with you, probably in a video, before next week, and you take the test. So don't worry, I'm not going to throw you in front of a test and expect you just to know something without me having talked about it, certainly in lecture, but also highlighting it probably on the study guide and the answers therein. So be on the lookout for that next week and be prepared for it, because it's not going to be super hard, but it is going to require you to know your stuff. More on that later on. Okay, so buckle up, strap in, because let's talk about each of these different types of plays and make you, some of you at least, utterly miserable, but I will try to keep it as painless as possible. Back for that in a bit.